remember the silence first. Not the kind you hear when you're alone at home, but a thick, unnatural stillness that presses against your ears, like the world's holding its breath. It was our third night camping near Blee Tarn, tucked in a remote part of the Lake District. My mate Ryan had found the spot online. Undisturbed, he said, proper wild. Just the two of us, a fire, some beers, and the stars. It sounded perfect. The first 2 nights were uneventful. Cold, misty, and damp. Typical British weather, but peaceful. No phone signal, no traffic, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. We'd pitch our tent just off a narrow trail, maybe 2 miles from the nearest car park. We hadn't seen a soul since we got there. It started with the Stones. On the 3rd night, we were sitting by the fire, half drunk and talking about the dumb stuff we used to do in school, when we heard a soft tap, like someone flicking a pebble at the tent. Ryan froze mid-laugh. You hear that? Another tap, this time on the other side of the tent. We stood up, torches out, scanning the trees. Nothing, just mist curling through the pines and the faint slosh of water from the tarn. Probably an animal, we decided. Badger or maybe a fox. We laughed it off, but we didn't talk much after that. Later, as we zipped into our sleeping bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I told myself it was just a beer. Still, I barely slept. In the morning, we found footprints. Human ones. Barefoot. They were smeared and half-faded by dew, but clear enough. Ryan knelt beside one and looked up at me, his face pale. These weren't here yesterday. We packed up that afternoon, but with the light fading and the trail muddy from last night's rain, we decided to stay one last night and head out early in the morning. That was a mistake. At sunset, the fog rolled in heavier than before. It hugged the trees, thick and gray, turning everything more shadow than shape. Even the fire struggled to stay lit. Around 10, Ryan said he needed a piss and wandered off into the trees. He didn't take the torch. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Ryan. I called. Nothing. I grabbed the torch and followed the direction he'd gone. The beam cut through the fog in short bursts. Pine needles cracked under my boots. My breath came out in clouds. Then I saw him, standing absolutely still about 30 feet away, facing the trees. "What?" I shouted, heart hammering. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. I took a few steps closer, the crunch of twigs under my feet the only sound. The torch flickered. When it steadied, he was gone. Just gone. I ran to the spot. Nothing. No footprints, no movement. Just fog and trees and the distant lap of water. I searched for hours, screaming his name until my voice cracked. I circled back to the tent just before dawn. He hadn't returned. I wanted to call for help, but there was still no signal. So I grabbed my pack and started walking. I barely made it 100 meters before I stopped dead. The stones were back. Not just scattered, arranged. Dozens of them, laid in spirals and symbols across the trail. Perfectly symmetrical. Something about them felt wrong. Too deliberate. Too clean. Then came the smell. A faint, coppery tang, like old blood and wet soil. It made me gag. I backed away and turned into the woods, taking a longer, more direct route back to the car park. When I reached it, the sun was up. A few early hikers were pulling into the lot. I flagged down a couple and told them what happened. They called the police. Search and rescue came out later that day. They found a tent and my gear. No signs of Ryan. No footprints. No stone symbols. Nothing. They treated me like I'd imagined it. Said people wander off in the fog all the time. Happens more than you'd think. But I knew what I saw. 3 weeks later, Ryan's phone was found 10 miles away in a farmer's field. Screen smashed. Battery dead. No fingerprints. No blood. Just mud and scratch marks on the casing, like it had been dragged. The police handed it over to his parents. They asked me if I wanted anything from his things. I said no. But a few days later, I got a padded envelope in the post. No return address. Inside was Ryan's watch. It was still ticking. Only, the time was wrong. It was stuck at 10:03 p.m., the exact time he walked into the trees that night. And when I held it, just for a second, I swear I could hear the stones tapping again. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no insects, no crackling branches. When a movement crawled through the night like a warning. But we are too ignorant that night. We were 3 friends on a weekend camping trip deep in the northern woods. Me, Dan, and Eric. It wasn't our first time camping, but it was the first time we'd gone this far off-grid. No phone signal, no cabins nearby, just pine trees, the muddy riverbank, and the hollow echo of our own voices. It started off perfect. We set up our tents by the river, built a fire, and cracked open some beers. Dan made chili. Eric strummed his travel guitar, and the sun dipped below the tree line in an orange blur. I remember the way the pine needles smelled when they burned, sweet and earthy. The first weird thing happened just past midnight. I was half asleep in my tent when I heard footsteps. Not the soft crunch of someone walking nearby, but deliberate, slow steps right outside my tent. I froze. The fire was out. Dan and Eric were in their tents. These weren't animal sounds. These were boots. Heavy. The steps circled my tent once. Then silence. I lay there, eyes wide open, heart pounding. Eventually, I convinced myself it was one of the guys messing around. But in the morning, both of them swore they'd slept through the night. Dan even laughed. "You probably heard a deer," he said. The second night, we locked up our food, sat around the fire again, but the mood was different. I couldn't shake that feeling, like someone had been watching us. I kept scanning the trees while pretending to listen to Eric's jokes. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange rustling sound. Not leaves. It was fabric, like a tent zipper being messed with. I unzipped mine and peeked out. There was another tent in the clearing. I blinked hard, thinking I was dreaming. But there it was, smaller than ours, olive green, with no logos. It hadn't been there the day before. I stared at it for a solid minute. No light inside. No movement. I crawled over to Dan's tent and whispered his name. He unzipped groggily and looked at me like I was nuts. I pointed at the third tent. His face dropped. "You guys set that up?" I asked. "No," he said slowly, now fully awake. "I thought you did." We woke Eric. He hadn't seen it either. All 3 of us stood around it, debating whether to unzip it. Eventually, we called out hello, and when no one responded, Dan reached for the zipper. Empty. No sleeping bag. No gear. Just pine needles and dirt. None of us slept after that. At first light, we planned to pack up and leave, but the third tent was gone. Just vanished. We searched the area, but there were no footprints, no signs of it being packed up, like it had never been there. I wanted to leave. Now. But Eric, always the stubborn one, insisted on one more night. Said we were overreacting. Said if someone was messing with us, they'd have to drive 5 hours through hell just to play a prank. That final night felt colder. We didn't even bother with the fire. We just sat in our tents, flashlights on, all 3 of us too wired asleep. And then came the scream. Blood-curdling. Not animal. Human. A woman's voice. Somewhere in the trees to the north. Dan bolted out first, dragging a flashlight. Eric and I followed. We searched the forest for 15 minutes, calling out, until Dan stopped suddenly. There, tied to a tree, was a red flannel shirt, blood on the collar, and on the ground, next to it, was a half-burnt photograph. 3 guys sitting by a campfire. Us. Same spot. Same angle. But we hadn't taken any photos. Eric began to laugh. The kind of laugh people use to hold off panic. Okay, this is Bull's ****. This is someone messing with us. But Dan's hands were shaking. Mine too. We sprinted back to camp. 2 tents. Mine and Eric's. Dan's was gone. Not collapsed. Not torn. Gone. We turned and called his name, but he wasn't behind us. We searched for 2 hours. No signs of a struggle. No gear left behind. Nothing. At sunrise, we finally got signal near the ridge and called search and rescue. They found Dan 3 days later, 8 miles north, near an abandoned ranger station. Shoes gone, nails broken, his face hollow like he hadn't slept in days. He doesn't remember anything after the scream. The sheriff said we probably got spooked by a bear or a squatter, but there were no tracks, no signs of wildlife. And that third tent, never explained. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about that photo. The fact that someone was out there, watching us, close enough to capture a moment we never lived. And every year since, on the same weekend, I wonder if there will ever be a day when he'll finally leave it all behind.